Well, as you know, one of the interesting things about the entrepreneurial world is over the last few years, the interest in what we do has really taken on in the media and has led to a whole range of TV shows, many of which feature successful, famous entrepreneurs. But what I've found about many of the entrepreneurs on these shows is they kind of fall into two categories. They tend to all be pretty successful, but many successful people, actually in any field, whether it be business or sport or anything else, find it fairly hard to articulate how they do it and what it takes to get to where they've got to. And our next guest is a real exception to this. I remember when Dragon's Den came on the BBC, everyone on it was interesting, but something about Doug Richard just grabbed my attention. He knew what he was talking about, he's smart, he'd been there and done it, he was willing to be upfront with people. And it was for that reason that I invited Doug to be with us this year, because I think right now, what we need most is, number one, someone who's been there and done it and learnt some of the hard lessons, and number two, someone who's willing to be very upfront and clear with you about what it takes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So Doug's best known for Dragon's Den, probably to most of us, but that's backed up by 2 decades of entrepreneurial achievement. He's the founder of School for Startups. He's the chairman and CEO and has been of several leading-edge, particularly technology-orientated companies. And the other thing about Doug that I think is really worth mentioning is he always seemed to irritate Duncan Bannatyne, and I think that's a real achievement. So with that, please give a big welcome to Mr. Doug Richard.
Let me just correct something. Duncan Bannatyne irritates me. And for very good reason. I mean, I like Duncan, in fairness, and I just stood up in front of a large audience and said he irritates me, so that was probably my first mistake today. I shall be hearing about that. Let me characterize why Duncan irritates me more than I irritate him, since I was going to tell a speech, but now I'm going to tell a story, aren't I? For those of you who haven't seen Dragon's Den, which is fortunately an increasingly small population, it's a very straightforward show. They put 5 people who are putatively expert investors. I can guarantee some of them were. And they put a large number of entrepreneurs in succession, mostly aspiring entrepreneurs with some of the crappiest ideas on the planet in front of you, so that you can take money out of your pocket and put it in their hands and it disappears forever. And that's kind of how the show works, right? And there was, in the first season of Dragon's Den, there was one great investment opportunity. And oddly enough, I actually made one investment. It's so unfortunate that they didn't overlap. But the great opportunity was this young researcher from Sheffield University who had, whose profession was something called a mycologist, which is quite obscure. He was a researcher in fungi and mushrooms, and he had invented a way in which he could increase the likelihood that truffles would grow. And I remember very distinctly him standing there and talking about he was a very straightforward guy. He just stood up, pretty much said, I can make it more likely that truffles will grow. And Duncan leaned over to me and said, Doug, psst, truffles don't grow, they're made out of chocolate. He's full of shite. See, I don't gotta say more. I win. Yeah. Right, that had nothing to do with anything. He said, Duncan, I responded. Right, so why am I here today? I guess I'm here today to talk a bit about how I have both been successful and unsuccessful. Last summer, I was asked to speak at Oxford University to a bunch of students, and I decided, because I get bored very quickly, I would reverse the order, and I would do Q&A first and the speech after. God only knows what I was thinking. And one of the first students stood up, and they're very precocious, aren't they? Which is a very nice way of saying obnoxious. And one of them, the first one stood up and asked me, so what's the biggest mistake you've ever made, with the sort of tone of voice that says, and I dare you to tell me, right? You know, kind of bring it on. And of course, I love when people do that to me. The problem was I wasn't prepared. Not in that I wouldn't have been happy to share with them my largest mistake, but they don't know me very well, and I'm actually a very quantitative, geeky guy, and I like to be authoritative in my answers. And I had actually never calculated my largest mistake. You know, I had made some very large mistakes, but I didn't really know which was the largest, you know. And so I felt a bit uncertain, and so I was very honest with him. I said, well, maybe I can just tell you the largest 3, and I'm not really sure which is the largest. I was really upset by this. He wasn't. He was really quite content. But I went home, and other things you don't know about me, since we're obviously in a mood of sort of confessional sharing today, is I'm also, what's the word? Manic depressive in an informal sense. So when I'm also a perfectionist while we're making a list. And these combine in very bad ways, right? Because therefore, as a manic depressive and a perfectionist, when I'm manic, I want to be as manic as possible. When I'm depressed, I put as much effort into it as well. And as it happened shortly after that speech, I was in a very bad mood one day, and I thought, what a perfect day to determine quantitatively, once and for all, what is the biggest mistake I ever made. And so I actually went to a lot of effort. I pulled up a spreadsheet, I made a list of all the huge mistakes I'd made. That took a while. And then I started to kind of work through numbers to try to figure it out. And it was a hugely successful effort. I was so depressed at the end. And I knew, like, God, that is a heck of a mistake. And I thought today, instead of actually giving a speech that would inspire you, I'd just talk about all the ways in which I fucked up in life. And out of this, you're going to get inspiration. Deal? Fine. I wasn't actually looking for feedback, okay? You must think I'm a nice guy. I'm not, okay? Just get over it. In order to understand my biggest mistake, I got to kind of talk about some of the stuff that led up to it, or you won't realize how big it was, right? I mean, because it's important to understand these things in perfect dimension. And so I have to go a ways back. I started my first company with my brother, Ken. By the way, I've learned many life lessons, and starting a business with your brother, actually with my brother, is a mistake. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't start it with family. I'm just saying don't start it with my brother. Yeah, I don't really want you to generalize from that, because for all I know, your brothers are better to start businesses with than mine. Anyway, so Ken and I started a business together, in large part because for reasons at the time which were quite mysterious to us, we were neither of us able to stay employed for very long. And it wasn't for lack of trying. I was incredibly helpful with all my employers. I used to give them huge amounts of feedback on how poorly they were running their businesses. I was always the first to volunteer with the mistakes they were making and point out to them in a very helpful way, saying, you could really do better. But as I said, we had challenges staying employed. And we decided, both of us, actually somewhat surprisingly simultaneously, that we needed to earn our own livings because nobody would hire us. And so we started a business together. And I don't really want to talk about that business in large part, except to say that it was, when we started it, it was what we were doing until we were going to do something, right? It was a way to make money until we figured out what we were going to do with our lives. Until one day, Ken and I woke up and realized actually this was what we were doing with our life, and we might as well do it. And it was the first time in my life I realized that your attitude has just a smidge of impact on everything. And this particular crystalline moment came to me quite early on in this business. This business was called ITAL Computers, I-T-A-L. We named it after a Bob Marley song. There's a phrase, I'm sure you're all fluent in Rastafarian, and he says at one point in one of his songs about ITAL and ID, which means righteous and right on, you may wonder what we were like in the mid-'80s in LA. Well, I'm sure that tells you all you need to know. So we sort of wore our long hair on the inside. And so it started this business, and the biggest problem with the company, we were reselling computers. So we were a computer reseller, as it were. And our biggest challenge when we started is we had no customers. And this continued for quite a long time. And there were a number of reasons for it. One is because we were crap at selling, and the second is because we had nothing unique to sell. And the combination is terrible for business. And we were trying to sell essentially PCs to small businesses, and there was no real reason they should buy from us, if I'm really brutally honest, and I tend to be. And I had just graduated from law school, and so I was one of the many Americans who'd gone to law school and never actually practiced in the law, but I knew a lot about the law. And these large tenders would come out from government, which people who were reselling computers would fill out and respond to. And Ken and I had a lot of free time on my hand because we weren't selling anybody anything. And so I said, why don't I just fill out some of these tenders and see if we can win one of these bids, as we would call them in the States. And Ken would say, well, you know, what if you do win? We're not really in a position to fulfill it. I said, well, don't worry, we'll lose. It's not a big deal. And so I had a little contest with myself, and it was how long did it take me to get to a no, right? And I figured the longer it took, the closer I was to winning, and winning meant just extending it. I really wasn't going anywhere, it's just I had a lot of time on my hands. And so the tenders would come out, I'd fill them out painstakingly, carefully, and send them back in, and they'd say no. And this went on for a number of months until, much to my brother's and my surprise, we didn't get back an immediate no. We got back a, you're not dead yet. You're advanced to the next round. And this, as it happens, was to outfit the largest set of hospitals in Southern California with a 4,000 PC local area network. Now, as we had only sold PCs in units of 1 up into that point, we thought that 4,000 would be, you know, 1 + 1, 4,000 times. How complicated can it be, right? Ignorance is a lovely thing. And I filled it out, and we found ourselves, and they hadn't said no. We got to a second round. And Ken quite worriedly said to me, Doug, we're at the second round. We might win. I said, that is so not a problem, Ken, I promise. We have no idea what we're doing. How could we possibly win? You think you know where this is going, don't you? Ha. You don't. The title of the speech is The Biggest Mistakes I've Ever Made, right? So off we go, and so we go through the second round, and now they wanted more detail. And you know, I deeply believe you should never lie. I don't think there's any purpose to lying in life. You can do things without lying. And so I was committed to losing this and taking as long as possible to do so without lying. And we got through the second round. I think vague would have been a probably more suitable term for some of my responses. And we found ourselves in the most amazing position, and that was we were invited to come down and present ourselves to 18 people who made up the decision-making committee who were going to decide which computer reseller was going to outfit the key hospitals in Southern California for the late 20th century and thus save tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. Fortunately, there was no pressure. And I said to Ken, gosh, Ken, I got this in the mail. We need to go do this. And he said, okay. He said, Doug, you know, we're allowed to bring up to 12 people. And I said, yes. He said, there's 2 of us. There's going to be like a lot of empty seats. I said, we're only bringing the top people from the company, Ken. And we did. We went down that day. And the only thing we did, there's only 2 things we did beforehand. One of the things we did is I bought my first ever business book. It's actually probably one of the last ones I ever bought, thinking about it. Be that as it may, it was a book, I can't remember the name of it. This is many years ago. It was about sales, basically. You know, it was really, really basic. It was the first one I could find in the shelves. And in fact, the only thing I remember from that day on from the book was never leave a sales meeting. It's really trite advice, but never leave a sales meeting without getting the next step, getting to the next step. It was incredibly, proverbially basic advice, but it was news to me. I thought that's pretty productive. And it concerned me because my brother and I are both quite talkative, and I was afraid we'd talk over each other, so we decided we would have a secret code. And the secret code was if I kicked my brother kicked me under the table, it meant that we were going to field the question. Unfortunately, in our nervous haste, we forgot to tell each other what the kick meant. So the kick could either mean you take it or I'll take it, but neither of us was quite sure. So we kicked a lot, but it wasn't as effective as we'd planned. And we got there, and there was this huge room, and there was 18 people on one side of the table, and then there were 12 chairs on our side, and Ken and me, and sitting there. And over a period of a number of hours, and it was really excruciatingly painful day, they asked us all these questions, and they asked us a lot of questions, and I wasn't going to lie. So they asked questions like, I don't know, there was a couple I can remember. One of them was, have you ever had an unprofitable accounting period? Thank God they asked the question that way. I said, of course not, because we hadn't finished our first accounting period, and who knew how it was going to end? You know, it could end on an up note. And they said, it's all in the way they asked the question. Will you have the team available, if you win this? And I thought, you give me that much money, I'll have anything you want, darling. And I didn't precisely phrase it that way. I said, yes. And I would, because they had used the conditional and the subjunctive, and technically that's a condition contrary to fact imagined in the future, and therefore, were it to happen, I would, which is the conditional attached to the subjunctive in a forward-looking way. Right? Right. So technically, I was telling the truth. And so this went on for hours. I was parsing logic in my head, finding the truth amongst all these questions. And we got to the end of this thing, and I think we were both just utterly exhausted. And all of a sudden I remembered, oh my God, the business book, I'm supposed to find the next step. And what I was completely unaware of were all the buying signals in front of me. And in hindsight, I look back, I realized we had done extraordinarily well. And we had some things going for it. She told us, I mean, the woman who chaired this thing said to me, you are by far the smallest business, but we're really incented to working with small businesses. We wanted to find a small business that could live up to our expectations. Little did she know that that was not what she discovered. And so she was saying all these things that I could have just shut up. But of course, one doesn't, does one? And so she said, are there any questions you have for us to close this out, Doug? We're on first name terms now, Doug. And I thought to myself, gosh, Sheila. Actually, I have no idea what her name was. But, so I said to her, yeah, I actually asked her, I said, so what do you think the next step will be? And she goes, well, I think you should keep your eyes out for a PO. And so I asked what any normal person would ask at that point. I said, what's a PO? Suffice to say, we did not win that sale. A bit more truth came out, and there you go. So that's not how we became successful. That entire story leads to a failure, what can I say? We then went on to become a more successful business, somehow. And in fact, we became the largest reseller of engineering computers, CAD/CAM systems in Southern California, which at the time had a huge and thriving aerospace industry. Unfortunately, there's two industries of LA. One is aerospace one was aerospace and defense, and the other, of course, is Hollywood, film and TV. And we were firmly in the grip of the aerospace, and we were defense industries, and we would sell computers to people. But then, unfortunately, peace broke out, and we fell on hard times. And we didn't know, we had never experienced hard times because we were woefully ignorant of business. I mean, when we wanted to double sales, we just put a second fax machine in and waited more aggressively. Assuming that the only thing that had held our customers back was that our fax machine had been so busy that they'd been unable to get through with what we then realized were purchase orders, POs. And so we were really quite unprepared for the downturn when it came. And so we had to resort to some really novel approaches to business. I'll share one of the things we hit on with huge success, I might add. It ran for about a year. At the time, we had moved from personal computers up, and we were now selling workstations as well. Workstations are larger, more expensive PCs that at the time ran Unix, and so companies like Sun Microsystems and Hewlett-Packard sold these things. And the biggest distinction between them was that a personal computer cost a couple $1,000s and a workstation cost tens of thousands of dollars. And Ken and I, in the brutal logic of the lazy, thought if you can sell something that costs more with the same amount of effort as something that costs less, well, that's just good business. And so we had gravitated quite quickly to selling workstations into the same customer base. Unfortunately, it was a very competitive market, and we were not very competitive guys. And much to our happiness, Sun Microsystems decided in their attempts to take over the world that they introduced a promotion that really made my first fortune. Because the promotion was very straightforward. They were battling Hewlett-Packard at the time, and they said to the whole world, we're going to offer 40% off any of the computers in our huge price list. Tens and tens of thousands of items. If you trade in a used Hewlett-Packard workstation. So it was a trade-in program. Very straightforward idea. Hadn't really been done in the computer industry. Certainly hadn't been done in high-end computers. And it was a stupid idea, to be honest. If you look back at it, Sun really didn't understand or didn't appreciate at the time. People don't buy computers that way, right? If you've invested tens of thousands of dollars in a workstation and you've then invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in software for it, you don't really give a shit, right? You're not going to just swap it in like a car. I mean, not that anybody would ever think to run a national rebate program for used cars, and how stupid that would be, but certainly not that I have opinions. Be that as it may, this was a bad idea. Kinda, right? And so Ken and I didn't realize that, and we looked and said, whoa, 40% off, that's cool, because we were going to get our wholesale margin off of that. So we would get a suitable discount below that. And so we were running around trying to find people who had Hewlett-Packard workstations they wanted to swap in, and we couldn't find anybody. And finally, in desperation, I just bought a used Hewlett-Packard workstation and shipped it to Sun so I could get my goddamn discount. And you know what's interesting? The cost of a used Hewlett-Packard workstation is less than 40% of the price of a new Sun workstation. Now think about that for a moment. That means if you buy a used Hewlett-Packard workstation and ship it up and get a new Sun workstation at a greater discount, you actually make money just doing that, right? You just kind of like it's a machine. You just turn a little crank and money pops out. And I like those things. And so we got into this habit of buying used HP workstations and shipping them up and getting 40% off the list price and then getting our subsequent wholesale margin on. In fact, we got such a great discount, we were actually selling Sun workstations at our competitors' cost, and they were pissed off. And we were happy. And Sun thought we were fantastic. And they're like, they even shipped us out, they shipped me out, because my brother couldn't go, shame, to New Orleans, and held us up for the entire distribution community as their best reseller. And they, it's like older brother syndrome, right? How come you can't be more like Doug? They'd say. He's really bought into our program. Technically, I had done just that. And so we were buying workstations, shipping them back, and everything was just going gloriously well. And in fact, until things got better, because my brother's older than I am, so I always used to get all the scut jobs. And one of them was calling up the warehouse at Sun, and I developed a relationship with the guy at the warehouse to ship these computers back, because they're huge, right? And they weigh hundreds of pounds. And so I got to know the guy really well, and I said to him one day, this is costing me a fortune. He goes, well, Doug, to be honest, if you want to save a bunch of money, just pull the motherboard out and ship me the motherboard. It's all I really need. And it only weighs a few pounds. And I thought, all you need is the motherboard? Funny thing, that. And so I started calling up looking for used Hewlett-Packard workstation motherboards, because they're way cheaper to buy than the whole workstation. And so I got into the habit of buying them and shipping them back. I can't believe I'm telling this story. Be that as it may, things went along swimmingly, because I was now paying a fraction of a price for an HP workstation, and I was getting deep, deep discounts on Sun workstations, and we found ourselves unable actually to keep up with the demand. And so we were just shipping Sun workstations by the truckload, literally. I mean, I actually recall a morning when a tractor trailer, we had our offices were not offices for the public, as it were. They were sort of, they weren't like retail, right? And they were actually on Old Hollywood Boulevard in the old RKO building, which you wouldn't know, but just think really not pretty. And just on like the third floor. I mean, they just weren't suitable for the business we were in. And a tractor trailer actually pulled up on Hollywood Boulevard and said, I remember the guy coming up with a clipboard and saying, I've got 420 workstations for delivery here. And you're looking around, you're thinking, where? It took hours. I mean hours, because there was just one elevator and there was a tractor. It was fantastic. And of course, you'd think we were smart in that. We'd have like